Thank you so much for joining me for another edition of a small part of American culture, actually a big part, all about politics. Today we are talking with author and political analyst Bradford Kane, who has written an amazing book. I'm not sure if he's a fortune teller or not, but it talks a lot about some of the things we're experiencing in our political landscape right now. So Bradford, thank you so much for joining me today with E Pluribus America.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you wrote an incredible book called Pitchfork Populism. As you can see, I've had some points that I wanted to talk to you about. But let's talk about the title of your book first. What does Pitchfork Populism mean?
Basically, what Pitchfork Populism tries to capture is that this is not actually populism. It's a false or faux populism. Traditionally, what populism is all about is empowering the masses. And we've had many populist movements in the history of America. But unlike those, in this case, Donald Trump basically energized his base. He identified a group of people who felt disaffected, felt left behind by both Democrats and Republicans for various reasons we can discuss. But he basically energized them to empower him so that he can basically have latitude to do as he wishes through his transactional approach according to his whim and caprice. And so that's why it's not actually populism, because normally populism, when you go back to economic populism and agrarian populism, William Jennings Bryan and other people like that, it empowers the masses to be able to bring their concerns and issues to the fore, and either through outrage or just feeling like justice or other issues like that. And that is not at play with this. So it's kind of the image from like the old Frankenstein movie where the townsfolk are upset. So they grab their pitchforks and torches and storm the castle.
And that's exactly what our political landscape is feeling like, especially with the recent debate where the president is accused of fueling more racism in the country by telling the Proud Boys to stand by. What are your thoughts on the debate in general, and what are your thoughts on that particular statement?
Unfortunately, it's another example of what Steve Bannon basically captured when he said that his and Donald Trump's objective is the deconstruction of the administrative state. It's basically tearing down our institutions. And I in the book on page 99, actually, I identify 5 major drivers that are Donald Trump's primary impulses, and you can cycle through them. It's kind of like the 5 stages of grief, where it doesn't go through each one in order. So different ones at different times. But one of those is deconstruction, and it's basically out of his he's upset at all that came before. So what you saw in that debate was he wanted to tear down the notion of debates. He didn't follow any rules. He goes according to what he wants, but it was for his objective, because he didn't want Donald Trump did not want Joe Biden to get ahead of steam on any important issues. So basically, he shouted him down. He overtalked. It was basically unfiltered, undisciplined. And you could say that's a strategy, or maybe that's just his personality, because unfortunately, we've seen too much of it. It may just be, I actually think he began the first few minutes in kind of a tempered tone. So I think he may have been coached to try to use a tempered tone. That dissolved after a few minutes, and Donald Trump's personality came out where he just wants to tear it all down.
And now he has COVID. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think, there's, multiple camps and saying he's making it up to avoid the next debate because of how terrible he did in this one. And there's other people that are saying, he really does have COVID, even though when he gets COVID, supposedly, he is not calling it the China flu, he's calling it COVID. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, of course, I wish Donald Trump and Melania Trump well, as I wish all people in America and anywhere in the world well when they get this or any other life-challenging disease. But this is not surprising. Going back to March, when he basically disavowed the science and was basically trying to tell people to do things that most of us knew was crazy, because most of us were listening to people like Dr. Fauci. And so for many of us, we kind of figured this was going to happen eventually, but then when it actually does happen, it's still obviously a huge deal. As to whether it's real or not, if it were only him who is testing positive, then I think we could possibly be skeptical. But when there are many people from similar events, and some people are being retested, and it doesn't all show up at the same time. There's a gestation period. So obviously Hope Hicks and Melania, but other people also, Mike Lee from when they had the event for the Supreme Court nominee days earlier. Who knows who knows who gave it to whom and who received it from whom and when. But because if there are many people that got it, then I don't believe then in that case it's not a farce. I don't actually think Donald Trump is making this up, because while I talk in chapter 5 about media, truth, and facts, and I talk about the different communication tools he uses, and basically tools of deception and distraction, this would defy that, because what we've seen in recent months is that he knows that one of his greatest vulnerabilities is how terribly he's handled COVID-19. He knows he's vulnerable on that because it touches every American, whether it's that you had a loss of someone in your family, or whether it's that you're scared of getting it, or whether you have an economic loss, or whether you've got your children at home because the schools are closed. It touches every household, every family, every person in America, and probably around the world, but in America. So he doesn't want our total attention being placed on COVID-19. So I don't think he would make this one up.
Okay. Well, that leads me to something you also write in your book. This is page 186, and you talk about accountability. We do have such a hard time currently in the era of Trump holding him accountable. We have a hard time holding him accountable to simple things, basic lies. We counted almost 2,000 lies that we can confirm that he's spoken all these lies. It is what it is, right? You write on page 186, in the era of increased accountability and transparency, candidates should be discouraged from engaging in deliberately deceptive assertions that impair electorates' faith in government. Can you talk a little bit about that and how Trump is able to actually do that? His entire campaign from start to now has been a deceptive one. He has been less than honest with the American people, even from how he claims to treat women to the handling of the coronavirus. Can you talk about that, and why is he able to get away with being held to the same standard, at least, as other politicians, especially a president?
This is unfortunately part of the Trump tragedy. In July, the Washington Post fact checker noted that he had crossed 20,000 lies and falsehoods during his presidency. As I call for in the afterword in my book, I speak directly to people who voted for Trump in the past or supported Trump. And I said, if you had a family member, a child, a spouse, a boss, a neighbor who was lying to you incessantly, would you trust them? Would you be upset? Would you be in their camp? Would you have something to say about it? Yes, you would not take that lightly. You would not accept it. It's unacceptable behavior. So basically, I'm asking people to remember that, lies are not acceptable because they violate trust. And so that is basically what he has been doing in, once again, deconstruction of the administrative state. It's all part of deconstructing. It's all part of creating his narrative with his alternative reality, trying to be the arbiter of truth and imposing it on everyone else. Because as Mary Trump described in her book about his psychology and his upbringing, he wants to control and create this narrative which glorifies him, and he's going to basically build it and ask everyone who he can get to adopt it. He wants them to adopt it, and so that's why, of course, with his loyal base, they are the principal adoptees. They are the ones who sign up, and there aren't that many who will be swayed. But that, once again, just a quick note, getting ahead of things, is that Donald Trump's people who voted for him in 2016 and his approval numbers now, that is not his base. His base is a subset of that. And in chapter 10, I talk about how it's somewhere between 20%, 22, 25%. That's it. Not the 40% that we think of as being, giving him his job approval numbers. So among those, those are the loyalists, and they don't seem to mind all the lies, and that's what I try to point out. But unfortunately, this is really troubling. I find that it is beyond deception. It is rather diabolical, because basically what he does with the lies, we heard from Olivia Troy, who was a lead member of the coronavirus task force, who resigned and went public with her reasons for discontent. And one of the things she reported to us all, told us all about, was that when it came out that in March that no handshaking was allowed, he said to a number of people in the room, "Good, that means I don't have to shake hands with these disgusting people." He called his supporters disgusting. That's what he thinks of his supporters. He looks down upon them. And because, obviously it's not his opponents who wanted to shake his hand, it was his supporters who wanted to shake his hand. Another important indicator that I mentioned in the book, one of the most revealing things he's ever said about what he thinks about his base and why he lies all the time, thinking he can get away with it, is that in February 2016, when he won the Nevada primary, he in his congratulatory speech, he thanked a lot of groups. Thank you to this one and that one. He saved the word love for two groups. I love the evangelicals. We understand that. We can discuss that. But the other use of the word love was, I love the poorly educated. He even said it twice. And basically, he knows that he's taking advantage of people who are poorly educated. That, in the opinion of many, including Mary Trump, her use of this word indicates that he's a predator. Because that's not just, basically he's manipulating the minds of the malleable. And that, when it's deliberate and intentional, that's not good. A few lies are a practice, then it becomes a pattern, then it becomes a predilection, then it becomes pathological, and then it's predictable. He's predictably lying for that reason.
He's also using fear to galvanize his base. He's using fear of immigrants. You also talk about that in your book. You say, Trump on immigration, he never proposed any specific changes. His America First strategy was basically just a chant and so forth. And Trump's approach was much more of a marketing or branding strategy. Why is fear capable of shaping our view of America and really shift the ideals of America that we all hold dear? How is he able to be successful in using fear to shape our America, our new America?
At the root of a lot of politics through the ages are two opposite emotions. On the one side is fear, whether it's a known adversary or threat or a conjured one. And on the other hand is hope or love. Fear versus love, fear versus hope. Obviously, 2008, President Obama, candidate Obama used hope. In this case, Donald Trump is all about fear. So one thing is that he's not the first person to try to leverage fear in order to gain a political advantage or to get to a political destination. Why is it effective? First of all, it's not effective with everyone. It's effective with certain people. And that gets into, in the first chapter, where I talk about our national identity, I talk about our split personality between rugged individualists and communal collectivists. And I talk in terms of what it is they value, what is it they care about, what motivates them. Well, jumping ahead, and we can get back to some more of that if you'd like, but applying it directly to your question, the people who are rugged individualists are more inclined to be concerned about what's theirs And by theirs, it's a small circle, not just totally theirs. It could be them and their family. It could be their town. It could be their city. But it's a smaller circle, their neighborhood, maybe their religious institution affiliation, whatever. But a smaller circle, whereas communal collectivists have a much broader circle. Whether, maybe it can go to the people of their state or their country or the world. I'll leave the universe to the astrophysicists. So, but it could be the country, it could be the world, and so inherent in those two different mindsets is that the distinction between fear and love, or fear and hope. In that, if you're worried about yourself in your own little unit, then you're worried about anything coming into contact with it and infringing it and taking away something that you feel you're entitled to, or something like that, and that makes fear a threshold issue. Whereas if you're a communal collectivist and you want to see everyone prosper, and you want to see all boats lifted, rising tides lift all boats, then what you're caring about is hope for the future, and you want to extend love and create opportunity for other people. So not everyone gravitates toward fear. It's part of the divisiveness. Personally, I believe that with a message of hope or love, for example, like what you heard a lot of that during the Democratic primaries also, that the message of hope and love extends the reach. It welcomes people in, and even people who you don't agree with. Even people who are political adversaries, you still want them to succeed, just because all of society thrives when everyone thrives.
Which is why probably Biden and Harris and even yourself, wishes the Trumps a speedy recovery.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's talk about the evangelicals, because you touched upon a couple of things there about goodwill for all men, in spite of them being adversaries or being a different political leaning group. Why does he have so much support from evangelicals, and what does that mean for a post-Trump era, or after Trump, whether he wins, let's say he wins re-election and he serves another 4 years. What will that mean for evangelicals? Are they hurting their brand by throwing their support behind Trump? How did they get here?
Evangelicals are traditionally accustomed to advancing certain principles. They have been put in a vice in this situation. In 2016, they had the excuse of, well, we don't know what he's going to be like. We don't know what we're going to get. And he's saying that he'll do certain things that we agree with, including smaller government, including, most importantly, of course, was Supreme Court justices and other judicial appointments. And they basically wanted to have a conservative philosophy be advanced, not just at that level, but everything from that individualist orientation, where it's a smaller government and more tax relief, things like that comport with an evangelical set of principles. The interesting thing is that what they found, even on the campaign trail with Access Hollywood tape, is that this person's character is completely unacceptable to them. So the question was, for them, what do we do? Do we try to take the goodies that fit with our agenda and our philosophy, and just kind of, try to pretend we don't see the character of the person putting it forth, or do we stand up for the principles? Well, they went ahead, by and large, with supporting him. I think that's different now. I mean, not completely, but partly. There's erosion, and that's because this duality, this internal conflict, is playing out in a lot of different ways. Consider also the gentleman who was the evangelical minister who was recently in the news. Thank you, Falwell, for certain activities that are not well received by the evangelical community.
This pool boy?
Pardon me?
This pool boy?
That'd be the one.
Okay. Yeah. Well.
So the issue is, which way do they go? Now they've gotten judicial appointments beyond their wildest dreams. They got tax relief, they got other things, but now they're seeing between that and also Jeffrey Epstein with underage girls and things like this, And Donald Trump's lies about that, saying, "Oh, I don't know Prince Andrew." Yes, you do. Photos of him laughing with him and everything. So there are a lot of evangelicals who right now are trying to deal with which way do I go, and you're seeing a split. It's not clear to me which way most will go, but it's certainly not going to be the overwhelming tide as it was before. And as to why they are that, so part of it is transactional, but part of it also is an emotional and a psychological thing. If you consider that from an evangelical point of view, this gets back into individualism. If for those on the individualist side, there's more of an inclination to identify someone who is the ultimate individualist. Well, Donald Trump claims to be that. He is not that. When he says that he's being strong, it's usually because he's being weak and he's trying to overcompensate for his different kind of issues, which Mary Trump lays out, especially in special detail. I address it in my book as well. It's basically things that we were all taught by our parents when we were, throughout our lives, that we all know. We don't have to have a degree in sociology. This is called basic life experience. When we're seeing a bully, when we're seeing someone put other people down constantly, it's all common sense, basic nature, that we know where they're coming from. And we're seeing that play out with Donald Trump. So we know that his image that he's been putting forth is a false image. Yet, some of the evangelical community who are looking for something of a higher power, there might be a common element there between that and certain other aspects of higher power to which they seek. There is an inclination to find something like that, to defer, to divest some of the responsibility for things that happen in their life. If people were upset and disgruntled and feeling disaffected, like from the 2008, 2009 economic turbulence that they never recovered from, and they're still angry. They, sometimes for some people, they want to be able to turn to someone and say, "Hey, you take this and solve it for me." Whereas people who are on the collectivist side might be more inclined to saying, "Hey, let's figure out a way to do this together and make society grow together."
I like the way you categorize all the different parts of the culturalism that makes up America, from individualism to collectivism and so forth. And we can get into that a little later. But as you talk about the evangelicals, I'm reminded of the late Congressman John Lewis, when he always advocated for, when you see something wrong, to say something. I just thought about him and thought that, wow, it's so sad that this one man could actually speak so much truth to power, and yet the evangelicals who claim to be truth with power, the power of God, refuse to do that and continue to support a man who is the epitome of what God or Jesus Christ warned against. So that leads me to ask you, go ahead.
Well, it's not for me to, of course, I appreciate everyone having their own faith tradition, and I support everyone's. But the important thing is that I urge people to do is to remember their own principles. So when you're looking at Donald Trump, the question isn't, do what, this set of voices tells you or that set of voices. Ask yourself, what is right? This is what I often ask, whether it's evangelicals, Republicans, or whatever, is to think of what you've always known and learned to be true and right in your principles, and act according to those instead of what a particular individualist might be asking you to do. And as to your John Lewis comment, to me, that's an extension of one of the lines that's been the most impactful in my life, which was Martin Luther King's, I think it was in his Birmingham jail letter, where injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Anytime there's injustice, it impacts everyone's ability to have justice, which is why Black Lives Matter, because if some people are being mistreated, then we're all being mistreated. And that even comes back to the evangelicals. If one wants religious liberty and mutual respect, one has to give mutual respect and religious liberty and live by their principles instead of putting them aside for some and bringing them in at other times.
And yet, in the current Trump era, we are veering very far away from those ideals that really buoyed us as a nation in spite of the civil rights movement, in spite of the Jim Crow era. It seemed like we had all these ideals that helped carry us along. And that leads me to to ask you, what does race play? Where does race fit into your pitchfork populism theory?
Basically, it's at the core of Donald Trump's mechanisms. The U.S. Census Bureau a number of years ago identified the year 2042 as the year when non-whites will outnumber whites. Now that in itself, even the phraseology there is troubling because it groups one group of people and another group of people. And I take issue with that in chapter 2 when I talk about demographics. But basically, what Donald Trump starts with his own worldview, which was, he was raised in Queens, which, as I mentioned in the book, I think that other famous Queens character, Archie Bunker, I thought he thought of him as a role model instead of a parody. So unfortunately, Donald Trump has his own mindsets about what the kind of world that he wants, where it's. He was raised in a certain era when, like in the media, it was all white, and there was no balance. There was no equal opportunity. There were not doors open. When he talks about "Make America Great Again," what he's talking about is going back to a mythical state of the 1950s when all you saw was white people, when black people did not count, Latinos did not count, Asian American, Native American. Everyone was in the background, and it was just his world of Ozzie and Harriet, or Father Knows Best. And in that world where he wants to bring that back, he takes umbrage at the fact that we are a diverse society. We believe in diversity and inclusion. When you look at the younger generations that grew up in a more contemporary context, they don't even know what he's talking about. That's why the numbers are overwhelmingly in favor of Joe Biden among younger cohorts, because Donald Trump's world of 50s, I mean, if you're 20 years old now, you care a lot more about the year 2050 than you do about the year 1950. So it's, they were raised in this era where we have friends and neighbors and schoolmates and work colleagues, where it's an integrated society. Donald Trump wants to take it back, which is why the other night in the debate, he was giving license to white supremacists. He didn't want to say anything bad about them. We know what just horrific comment that he would make on such a large stage as that. Even when he tried to clean it up the next day, when he was forced to clean it up, he still left open the room for them to do things. Basically, it goes back to the early part of the Trump administration. There was the Countering Violent Extremism Task Force that was principally oriented toward domestic violence, domestic terrorism, especially white supremacists. They killed it. They killed the task force. They zeroed it out. Last year, they under pressure, they created a little something, but they never funded it. So basically, it's just it's a complete non-priority, and that, of course, is low profile compared to Charlotte and the S-hole countries comment and the racism that comes out from Donald Trump on a regular basis. It's not like, if we were talking in 2017, we could talk about hints of something or indications of another. But when you've got one after another, you've got to call it as it is, but basically the whole reason why Black Lives Matter got so much traction throughout the country among all cohorts, I think all ages too, but all races and ethnicities, is because people recognize, first of all, that line about justice from Martin Luther King, that our whole society is vulnerable if Black people are being mistreated or treated adversely or not given equal protection under the law and equal dignity in police interactions and judicial interactions. And also it's because you go where the problem is. You don't say all lives matter, because that's not where the problem is. Not all lives are getting beaten up and shot and killed and murdered for spurious reasons that are totally unjustifiable and horrific. Black lives are. So you say what the problem is, and then if, obviously, the underpinning, of course, we all care about all lives, but that's not where the problem is. So Black Lives Matter has to be the centerpiece.
Let's talk a little bit about the role of the media in pitchfork populism. You alluded to it a little bit earlier when you talked about the real numbers and of Trump's base, and that somehow they're just reshaped differently when we hear about them. Can you talk about the role the media plays in fueling Trumpism?
A huge one. In Chapter 5, the battle for truth and facts in the media, I refer to it as the good and the bad and the ugly. On the good side is that, unlike, if you go back to the 1800s, there were just newspapers, and who could own a newspaper? Only certain very wealthy people who are all, of course, old white men. And then radio, same. Television, same, except corporations. But there was a wall. Now, the beautiful part, the good part, is that there's like no gatekeeper. Anyone can be able to put forth a message because of social media and everything else. So it's democratized. Media is democratized. Everyone can have a voice. Everyone can have a say. The bad is the same. Is the flip. So the other side of that same coin is that back in the day, like when you had, for those of us who especially are fond of Walter Cronkite, when he spoke, those were accepted facts that created a baseline of understanding, and then we could branch out from there and drill down on other issues. But when he spoke, that was a baseline set of facts. So the bad now is that we don't have a commonly held set of facts, a common source, the arbiter of what is true. And then the ugly is manipulation. And that's where I was talking about before, how Donald Trump uses the media to manipulate, basically manipulating the minds of the malleable. He's got a number of tactics. Preemption and projection is one of his favorites. He knows what his weaknesses are, and he tries to impose them on other people, and he tries to do it before they do it to him so that he can say, hey, you're only responding to what I said to you. So it's preemption and projection. He does that all the time, and it's fascinating because it's a bit of a roadmap to where are his weaknesses. When he does that, it's kind of like, oh, thank you. Yes, that too. Drain the swamp. He's the one who came up with that. That's called projection.
Absolutely.
He also told us that no one knows more about all this political shenanigans than I do. That's right, because he was engaged in them, and he came up with drain the swamp so he could make it seem like he was the good guy cleaning things up, when really he's the swamp creature in chief. And as you saw from his administration, and have seen ever since, one person after another were resigning because of misappropriating money or misuse of time, misuse of staff, misuse of influence, all kinds of problems with that. But it's not just that. It's branding. No collusion, witch hunt. No collusion, witch hunt. Over and over and over and over. And that's because people who are open to that, for some people, if they hear it enough times, it's like, oh, I guess that's what it is. Whereas for other people, it's like, no, Shakespeare taught us. It's a methinks moment. She doth protest too much, methinks. And so it's different people regard it differently. And just his distraction, he has back pocket issues. When things are going rough, he will suddenly throw out something else that's maybe even more damaging, but it changes the subject. Now, which gets back to the beginning of the conversation. I don't think COVID fits that, because this is the subject that hurts him like maybe the most. So that's why I don't think COVID is an example of that. But there's so many others. He does that all the time. If something's ugly, he'll say, I'm going to pardon someone, or I'm going to, or cancel someone's security clearance, or things he could do unilaterally, or do an executive order, something that is appalling, but it switches the subject for at least a news cycle or two, and it floods the zone so that a lot of people become overwhelmed and tune it out.
And they all make money. And let's not forget fake news. And I think it's important to remember as citizens that the news is also a business.
In Chapter 5, on the bit about fake news, I do put forth, in every chapter, I talk about the future also. It's not just the past, it's also solutions for the post-Trump era. And within that part of each of the 10 forces, I have solutions to existing problems. So in the media chapter, I have solutions with regard to what you just said for broadcast and cable, the large-scale media, and a separate set of solutions with regard to social media or small band. But there, two different situations that need to be addressed differently, but definitely some ways to remedy some of those problems.
Okay, let's talk about what you write about on page 132, voters, like-minded. You write, when like-minded voters are concentrated in separate districts, primary elections become more important since the party registration of voters in each district tilts heavily in one direction or the other. And that led me to think about the term all politics is local. Can you give us some insights? What would you like people to take away on voter like-mindedness and how it impacts the political landscape?
The most important word we have right now is vote. And that sounds obvious, but it really is the heart of the answer to your question. What that's talking about is gerrymandering. That's a question of political power. That's a question of who wins in local elections as well as congressional elections, as well as, of course, the presidency. But every 10 years, the census is taken, as has been going on. And after that, there will be redistricting with reapportioning seats to states and such. And then each state legislature will carve up their state into different districts. Some, according to political power, according to who has the votes to impose their map, will concentrate people into certain districts. These have created violations of the Voting Rights Act. This gets back to the Shelby case, which dealt with pre-clearance, and of course our dearly departed Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg played an enormous role in her dissent. And I believe that dissent is going to resurface someday as a majority opinion. Or at least parts of it, there's some evolution too. But the idea is that in places like North Carolina, Texas, a lot of others, districts have been drawn in such horrific ways that courts overrule them because, it comes down to, there's a fight over the primary, but basically people are disenfranchised and they're all clustered together and it's packing and cracking. So some districts will, they try to concentrate people of a particular ethnicity in this district so that they don't have a chance of winning in two districts, things like that. And there are a lot of those kind of games that are being played, and ever since Shelby case, the floodgates opened, and you've seen more of that nefarious activity, and so that's why vote, as Nancy Pelosi says, because that's the way that you prevent some of that happening in the future.
And that is very important. However, we're dealing with Governor Abbott from Texas, who's taking away people, who's really disenfranchising voters. He's taking away drop boxes. He's only placing one in each county. How does that shape our country? Is that who we are as Americans? This is Trumpism at its finest hour.
The Trump acolytes are trying to come up with new ways for voter suppression, voter intimidation. So obviously what he said at the debate about the Proud Boys, that's voter intimidation. And he even raised something about people went into the polls and this terrible thing, they were told they had to leave. Yeah, because you're not allowed to be inside of a poll while people are voting. A polling place while people are voting. I've been a poll watcher. There are rules about how many feet you have to stay away from any entrance so that there is no intimidation. So unfortunately, Donald Trump was trying to change those rules too. But you see with his acolytes, they're trying new ways of voter suppression. So yes, Abbott with his mailboxes, drop-off boxes, one per county, which is insane, because some counties are enormous and you have to drive hours in order to drop. Basically, it's a form of voter suppression. Same way as in Texas, I don't remember the year, if it was 2013 or 2014, whatever the year was, when they passed a law saying that you could show your gun license, gun registration license to prove your identification, but you cannot show your student ID because, let's see, who carries one and who carries the other? So there are all these, I call them creative, I guess they are creative. They're nefarious, they're ugly, they're malevolent, they're malicious. They're horrific ways of trying to keep people from voting and keeping their vote from counting.
And that leads me to talking about international relations and our standing in the world. When the world, other countries think about America, we're seen as a beacon of hope. We have a fantastic constitution, that has evolved, thankfully. But we have a constitution that has been adopted by most other countries in the world. And we are the leader of the free world, so to speak. And yet we have a president in office who, according to our own intelligence community, was, he was supported by Russian influence. Even his own generals have come out and spoken against him and consider him a security threat. So talk about, and you do talk about trade and international agreements. Can you talk a little bit about that chapter and where we're coming from, how Trump is impacting our standing in the world when it comes to trade, when it comes to humanitarian issues, and all kinds of other issues that we have been seen as leading in?
By far the most important export from the United States of America since 1776 has been democracy, without a doubt. It's not a question of dollars and cents. It's about having, basically that's why we've been the leader in the world, at least especially since World War II, in every way, economically and geopolitically. But democracy is what makes us special. When you look at what makes us a country, it doesn't fit the classic definitions in terms of a single ancestry or language or religion. It's a set of principles and ideals and objectives and a shared purpose. And that is embodied in our founding documents, big asterisk, that had many major problems. Obviously, the 3/5 compromise is no compromise. It was immoral on its face to begin with and outrageous to begin with. But fortunately, one of the things that the founders knew also brilliantly was that this Constitution should be able to be amended, and it was. Also, I say partly tongue-in-cheek often that if Thomas Jefferson could change one word in his document, it would be that all people are created equal, because he cut out 50% of the population with one word. And of course, Native Americans were not even, comprehended. But we've cured a lot of those problems. We try to make it a more perfect union. We have solved a lot of problems, but of course, we still have a long way to go. We're on a journey. Anyone who says we haven't made progress is not paying attention to the progress that's been made. Anyone who's saying that we've made enough progress and now we have to go back to some other, they don't know what they're talking about, because we never did get to the promised land. We still have a long way to go. It's a work in progress to form a more perfect union. So when Donald Trump tries to embrace not democracy and our founding documents, which he doesn't understand anything about, for anyone who does, when you hear him talk about them and the generality with which he doesn't, I don't think he's ever read any of them. I don't think he understands any of them. Personal opinion. But the way he embraces dictators, authoritarians, autocrats, and he, not just in terms of wanting to do business with them, but even makes comment, like when President Xi of China got a change in his laws to become president for life, Donald Trump jokingly said something to the effect of, we should do that here. I'd like to do that too. You don't joke about things like that in a democracy. That's unacceptable. What Donald Trump since then has made jokes about, and even at his rallies, 12 more years. What? So he'll say, oh, I'm joking or whatever. Yeah, the same way he said the other day at the debate, oh, I was being sarcastic when Joe Biden reminded him that, Donald Trump wanted to cure COVID with bleach. He said, oh, I was being sarcastic. No, you weren't. You look back at the tape, He was saying it with sincerity. In that same way, when he talks about anti-democratic things, you can see that that's part of what he admires about dictators and authoritarians, is that they get to do what they want, unfettered, without accountability, and they don't have to worry about anything. They can do it. That's what he quests. That's what he dreams of. So when you talk about our influence in the world, he is diminishing it by marginalizing our founding principles of a republic and a democracy. So in some countries, which then have anti-democratic movements going on, some of them are citing Donald Trump. Some of them are quoting Donald Trump. They're pointing to him as the example, which is just horrendous, horrific, and horrifying. And when you talk about his, trade agreements are small potatoes compared to what he's doing globally on democracy. But when you talk about trade agreements, also, first of all, most of that's a ruse. He never understood that the Trans-Pacific Partnership was not just about dollars and cents, because that's all he cares about, because that's a metric he can measure, and he's always trying to measure himself so that he can measure up to a certain standard, which we know what that stems from. But it's not about dollars and cents. It's about geopolitical influence. And he basically threw it out the window, and China said, thank you very much, and they came in and filled the vacuum. And what he did with the Paris Accord, right, something very similar. He took us out of the mix, basically marginalizing our ability to influence things and partners and lead. So by him doing that, so okay. And even if you want to talk about its great achievement about updating the NAFTA to the new agreement that we have with Mexico and Canada, basically what he did when he put forth his arrangement just between the U.S. and Mexico was basically NAFTA. Yes. It had a little bell and a little whistle and a little tweak. But then he said to Canada, hey, if you want to get in on this, you can too. And then they started struggling with, well, why are we even doing this? But it's barely even changed. Fortunately, Congress got involved, and I believe there were both Democrats and Republicans in Congress who put forth different changes, which made it a different agreement, which actually improved the agreement. And so what Donald Trump is taking credit for has nothing to do with Donald Trump's input. So bottom line, trade agreements, he's the worst negotiator. He has not been able to effectively negotiate. He continues not to be able to. And as to the most important thing, way more than whether or not you're selling, selling 100 units of air conditioners to Siberia or something. Much more important than that is what he's doing to damage our principal export, United States democracy.
Well, it's been an incredible conversation. I can go on and on and on with you about politics, but I'd like to end with with the notorious RBG. Can you, unfortunately, she has recently passed, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has clearly made her mark, not just in America, but I would say for women all over the world. She has become an icon. Can you talk about her legacy now and in the future, and how it will continue to shape us in spite of Trumpisms?
She has legendary status. The unbelievable part, she had legendary status in her own lifetime, which almost never happens. And part of it is because she did so much for civil rights, even before she got to the court. And I mean, she was a tremendous lawyer. We think of her in terms of women's rights. Well, yes, that was the principal focus, but it goes back to that injustice comment, that when there's injustice anywhere, it's a threat to justice everywhere. So Thurgood Marshall changed the equation for African Americans. She did the same thing with regard to women, but both have an effect of increasing equal opportunity and respect and opening doors and just basically making a more inclusive society for everyone beyond the specific wording of a particular person in a particular case. She set a tone. She expanded that dream extended it to that many more people, and laid the groundwork for someone else to pick up the baton and keep running.
What would you like readers to take away from Pitchfork Populism? What would you want them to learn about our democracy, and really how do we recover? Because I know you don't just talk about all the negative things, but you in a way show us that there is hope. Can you talk about that a little bit, about how folks, what you would like folks to take away from your book?
When your audience reads the book, they'll find that basically what Donald Trump is doing is contrary to the fabric of the United States. It's damaging, destructive to that which we all hold dear. If he were to have another 4 years of doing this, Lord knows what situation we'd be in. It's unfathomable, and it's hard to even comprehend what he could do without even being further checked. You know, you mentioned before about accountability. We got to remember all the inspector generals that he fires and all the subpoenas that he tells people not to respond to. So imagine 4 more years of that and everything else that he's doing. And so, you know, what it comes down to is be in touch with your own beliefs. Use critical reasoning as the principal filter when you watch the news. You know, the 10 forces that I lay out provide kind of a toolkit for being able to make sense of what goes on every day in the news, whether it's in the White House or in Congress or in DC in general, or even more broadly, sociological forces in the country. Use critical reasoning to be able to apply, to be able to make sense of what's going on. Act out of what you know to be right, what you've known all along your life. Don't be told, don't allow yourself to be, you know, once again, he's trying to manipulate the minds of the malleable. Don't fall into that category. You know, stand up for your own beliefs and what you've always known, what you knew to be true and real prior to his entry into the political scene in 2015, 2016. Think of it that way, hold on to it. And with that in mind, one is vote. That is absolutely essential for every person. But even more important, I know what's more important than voting. Of course, every person should vote. Think of everything you can do to help other people vote. Register people, make phone calls, especially focus on battleground states. I'm a Californian. I tell people in California, that's great that you vote, please do, but spend your time reaching out to people you know in battleground states to urge them to get involved and tell each of them to call 10 people. And basically, if this were a country where it were required by law for everyone to vote, which we're not, that would be too authoritarian. But if that were to happen, it's no question which way most people want to see this go. So the whole question is, get everyone to vote and do everything you possibly can, because November 3rd is only a little ways away, and it's perhaps the most important date in our lifetimes.
And I'd like to add, run for office. Run for office, local office, even for dog catcher. Run for office, take responsibility yourself, especially I would encourage women and minorities to not be afraid to step in and take a leadership role in your own country. And with that, thank you so much, Bradford Kane. I really enjoyed this time with you. I've learned a lot. It was incredible. And thank you for joining me for another Culture and Politics Moment with E Pluribus America. I'm Jeanette Lenoir, and this is Our American Culture.
Thank you, Jeanette.